Hello, my marvelous mushies. Today we are going to go over shadow work. In order to go over shadow work, we must go over what the shadow is. Okay, so if you want to grab a notebook and pen, you can follow along. This is a face. This says persona. Then there's some light behind the persona, and this is consciousness. Your consciousness. You're aware of your persona. You're aware of your consciousness. What you're not aware of is your shadow self. This is the part of you that's hidden. It's not bad. It's not negative. It's just hidden. It's the unconscious aspect of yourself. Okay? Now, with that said, your shadow is visible to other people. Other people are aware of your shadow, even if you are not. That should make you uncomfortable. That should make you uncomfortable. That should pique your interest and your curiosity to want to get to know your shadow self. The shadow is dark, but your pupils are dark. The womb space is dark. Space is dark. And none of those things are inherently evil or bad or negative. They're just dark. Okay? So it's not bad. It's not negative. It's not evil. It's just hidden. It's just unconscious. You're just not aware of it. But let's get into the nitty gritty. Okay? So go ahead and draw a bubble person and write higher self. Or draw a stick person and write higher self. Okay? Then you're going to take 3 to 5 words to describe your higher self. So for me, I wrote ambitious, kind, loving, just, and creative. Okay? That's to describe your higher self. Now you're going to take a darker color and you're going to draw another person for your shadow self. Okay? And now, what I want you to do is I want you to take the words that you used to describe your higher self, and I want you to take the direct opposites of those words to describe your shadow self. Okay? These do not necessarily have to be true or something that you agree with. Just go ahead and write them down. So for my higher self, I wrote ambitious. For my shadow self, I wrote apathetic. For my higher self, I wrote kind. For my shadow self, I wrote mean. For my higher self, I wrote loving. For my shadow self, I wrote indifferent. The opposite of love is not hate, it is indifference. For my higher self, I wrote just. For my shadow self, I wrote unjust or bully. For my higher self, I wrote creative. For my shadow self, I wrote boring. Now again, you do not have to agree with all of these. We're doing a thought exercise, okay? We're doing a think piece. This is not the facts. Okay? So I don't want anybody to freak out. Just work with me, okay? Just work with me. All right. So for my shadow self, I wrote apathetic, mean, indifferent, unjust, and boring. When I see apathetic, indifferent, unjust, and boring, I'm not super triggered. And that's because I've done shadow work on these areas. I have done shadow work around being apathetic, unjust, boring, and indifferent. I'm already working on those things. I already know that there's a little bit of truth to that. I'm already aware of it, and I'm already working on it. So this cannot be used as a weapon to hurt me when I write it down because I've done work on this. However, when I see mean written down for my shadow, I'm triggered. I'm very triggered when I see the word mean because that is not a word that I would use to describe myself. I wrote myself down as kind for my higher self, and I want to be in the state of my higher self. So to see that written down as mean is triggering for me because that is not at all how I would describe myself. So because I'm so triggered, I'm going to investigate this, okay? I'm going to investigate this word mean. Now, I've already done my investigation to share this with you in the video, but I wrote down that I can be mean, but I'm mean to myself. I'm not mean to other people. I'm mean to myself. And that makes me an inconsistent and unsafe person because, again, there's a discrepancy there. Why am I nice to other people, but I'm mean to myself? Why am I kind to other people, but I'm cruel to myself? So that's what I'm investigating. It's like internally, okay? So I wrote down that I had childhood and teenage trauma from neglect and abuse. And then I wrote down an arrow saying people were mean to me. Another arrow, I internalized it, meaning when the meanness was projected onto me, I took it personally, and I internalized that abuse and neglect. And then it became a trauma loop that I started living in, where I would abuse myself. I would neglect myself because that's what I thought I was worthy of. So now that I see this clearly written out for me, it came from trauma, I internalized it, I took it personally. It was never personal. It was never about me. It was about the people that were neglectful and abusive to me. But I made it about myself. And I used this as a measuring tool to value my worth. And I devalued myself over and over and over again in this trauma loop. Okay? You can do this with all 3 to 5 words that you wrote down. Okay? So I'm not trying to shame you. I'm not trying to make you feel bad about yourself. Unless that is helpful to you and a little bit of shame is necessary. A little bit of shame is necessary if you have a really big ego. If you don't feel shame very often and you feel shame doing this lesson, I'm going to say that that's healthy. Okay? If you are someone like me that tends to ritualistically shame themselves, I'm not trying to shame you. Okay? I don't want you to get stuck in shame or whatever your sensation is for the shadow self. For me, it's shame. For you, it might be anger or sadness or rage or apathy. There's a lot of different sensations that you could feel it. But I want you to write down what you feel the most about your shadow self. Okay? So for me, I'm going to write down shame. If I can spell. So I wrote down shame. That's the big sensation that I feel when I see these words. And if someone was to say that about me, I feel shame. You might have a different sensation, but write it down. Okay? Also do this for the higher self. Okay? When you see the higher self words, what do you think about yourself? I have 2 big things that come through for me. And that's love and honor. Okay? So you're writing down your experience, love and honor, and then shame. Okay? And again, your words are going to be different. Totally fine. Okay? And then just take a moment and sit with this. All right? Just try to process this. Don't just throw it out like it's stupid. Try to find something about this that is useful to you. Okay? What is the most useful thing about this to you? Okay? And I'm going to write down, I'm going to circle the word that triggered me the most, which was mean. Okay? That was the most useful thing to me because of the deconstruction that I did around it. This came from childhood trauma, from neglect and abuse. They were mean to me. I internalized it. And then it got me stuck in a trauma loop where I was abusive and neglectful to myself. Okay? And just because I like things to be equal, I'm going to pick out my favorite word for my higher self, which is just. Okay? That's my favorite thing about my higher self, is that I know what is just for myself and for other people. Now that might sound a little narcissistic, and it can be when we're getting into the shadow, but from a higher self perspective, you want someone that knows what justice is. You want a leader to know what is just and unjust, because that establishes a sense of trust in that leader. Okay? So that's my favorite thing about myself. For my higher self is just, and the most impactful insight from my shadow self is that I can be mean to myself. Okay? So this is the prequel. Take a moment to process, and then join me for the next video. Thank you so much for watching.